Locked and loaded. Those are not words from a movie trailer. That is the phrase working scientists now use to describe the most famous fault line in the world, the San Andreas, the 800-mile scar running the length of California. And here is the part almost everyone gets wrong. When seismologists say locked, they are not describing something safe, something secured, something under control. They mean the exact opposite. They mean the fault is stuck. They mean two tectonic plates that are supposed to slide past each other have been jammed in place for 169 years, storing every single year of mist movement as raw, elastic energy in the rock beneath Southern California. And this year, a team of researchers published something that turned a long-standing worry into a number. According to their modeling, the stress accumulated on the southern San Andreas system has now reached its highest level in 1,000 years. Not a century, a millennium, higher than at any point since before Columbus sailed. And buried inside that same research is a second discovery that is arguably more alarming than the first. A geographic weak point about 50 miles from downtown Los Angeles that scientists are calling an earthquake gate. A junction that, under the right conditions, could turn one major earthquake into two faults rupturing together. Today, we are going to decode exactly what locked and loaded really means, what this new research actually found, what it did not find, and what it means for the more than 20 million people living on top of this system. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the facts, the science, and the real stakes. Quick pause before the deep dive. Drop a comment right now. Do you live in California, or have you ever felt a California earthquake? Northridge, Ridgecrest, even a small jolt that rattled the dishes. Tell me where you were, because this audience stretches across the entire West Coast, and your firsthand stories put real human texture on these numbers. If you want to be the first to know every time something significant happens geologically, subscribe now. It is completely free, and a thumbs up seriously helps get this to people who live on this fault. Let us push for 5,000 likes. Now, into the science. To understand locked and loaded, you have to understand what the San Andreas actually is, because most people picture it wrong. It is not a crack in the ground that occasionally wiggles. It is the boundary between two of the largest plates on the planet. Everything west of the fault, Los Angeles, San Diego, the entire coastal strip, rides on the Pacific plate. Everything. East of it sits on the North American plate, and these two giants are in permanent motion relative to each other, grinding past one another at roughly 5 centimeters per year, about the speed your fingernails grow. That motion never stops. It is driven by heat, circulating in the Earth's mantle, and no force on the surface can pause it. Now here is the critical part. Along some stretches of the fault, that motion happens smoothly. The central section near the town of Parkfield actually creeps, slipping quietly in small increments, releasing its energy in frequent moderate earthquakes. But the southern stretch, the section that runs past San Bernardino, Riverside, and the Coachella Valley, toward the edge of Greater Lossy, Angeles, does not creep. It is locked. Friction has welded the two sides together in the upper crust, so while the plates keep moving at depth, the locked section cannot slip. The rock in between does the only thing rock can do under those conditions. It bends. It compresses. It stores the mist motion the way a drawn bow stores the archer's pull. Scientists call this elastic strain, and the theory describing it, elastic rebound, was born in California itself, written after the 1906 San Francisco disaster. Every year of lock adds roughly another 5 centimeters of mist slip to the account, and the southern San Andreas has been accumulating that debt since before the American Civil War. The last time the southern San Andreas produced a great earthquake was January 9, 1857, the Fort Tejon event, estimated at magnitude 7.9. It ruptured roughly 220 miles of the fault in one continuous tear, and the shaking is believed to have lasted between 1 and 3 minutes. California at the time held a few 100,000 people. The same corridor today holds more than 20 million, and the southernmost segment of the fault, the stretch near the Coachella Valley and the Salton Sea, has an even longer silence on its record. Paleoseismic evidence, the buried layers of torn and offset sediment that scientists dig up in trenches, shows that segment has not ruptured in roughly 300 years, since around the time of the 1700s. Its average interval between major earthquakes, read from centuries, of those buried layers, is significantly shorter than the silence it is currently in. That is what loaded means. Not a prediction. A ledger. 169 years of mist motion on one section, 3 centuries on another, all of it stored as strain in the crust, waiting for the moment the friction finally loses the arm wrestling match against the accumulated force. Which brings us to the research that pushed this story back into the headlines. A team led by Dr. Lilian Burkhardt at the University of Bern in Switzerland published work in the Journal of Geophysical Research, Solid Earth, built around a physics-based, 4-dimensional computer model of Southern California's fault network. Instead of just measuring Today's Strain with GPS, the team reconstructed the past 1,000 years of earthquake history on both the San Andreas and its close neighbor, the San Jacinto Fault, feeding the model radiocarbon dating from trench studies, geological offsets, and centuries of historical records. Then they ran the whole system forward to the present day and read off the stress. The headline finding is the one you have already heard. Multiple segments of the southern San Andreas system are now sitting at or above the highest stress values seen anywhere in the entire 1,000-year simulation. In the model's terms, the system is not approaching a critical threshold. It has already crossed it. The second finding is the one that deserves far more attention than it gets, the SAMs. Andreas and the San Jacinto faults are not isolated lines on a map. They converge at a place called Cajun Pass, the mountain corridor about 50 miles northeast of downtown Los Angeles, the gap that Interstate 15 runs through on the way to Las Vegas. The researchers found that this junction can behave as what they call an earthquake gate. Most of the time, the geometry of the junction acts as a barrier, stopping a rupture on one fault from spreading to the other. But when stress on both faults is high at the same time, the gate can effectively swing open. A rupture racing along the San Andreas could jump the junction and continue down the San Jacinto, or the reverse, merging two fault systems into a single event. Their modeling puts a joint rupture in the range of magnitude 7.4 to 7.8, shaking not one corridor but the Los Angeles Basin, San Bernardino, Riverside, and the Coachella Valley in the same event. And according to the study, the current stress state on both faults is elevated enough that the gate should be considered unlocked. A USGS scientist who co-authored the work, Kate Scherer, put the core problem in one sentence. Because it has been so long since either fault system produced a major earthquake, the accumulated stress is enormous. And when the director of the statewide earthquake center was asked when the next great event might come, his answer was the only honest one available. It could be today, tomorrow, in 10 years, or in 30. On a geological clock, there's no difference between those options. Now, why should you believe that a fault can stay silent for centuries and then release everything at once? Because California has already shown us both halves of that story, and so has the rest of the world. In 1906, the northern San Andreas, which had been quietly loading in exactly the same way, ruptured under San Francisco at magnitude 7.9. The shaking wrecked the city in under a minute, and then broken gas lines and severed water mains did something worse. Fires burned for 3 days with fire crews standing next to dry hydrants, and around 3,000 people died. The lesson of 1906 was never just about shaking. It was about what a great earthquake does to the systems a city depends on. And for a more recent reminder that Southern California's ground is very much alive, look at July 2019. Over the 4th of July weekend, the Ridgecrest sequence delivered a magnitude 6.4, followed a day later by a magnitude 7.1, the strongest shaking in the region in 20 years. It happened on a lesser-known fault system in the Mojave Desert, away from the big population centers. And even so, it cracked buildings, sparked fires, cut power, and rattled nerves from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. Ridgecrest was a warning shot from a minor player. The San Andreas is the headliner, and the energy budget we are discussing is in a completely different class. A magnitude 7.8, the upper end of the joint rupture scenario, releases roughly 30 times the energy of Ridgecrest's 7.1. And that is the number that state emergency planners have already gamed out in frightening detail. The famous shakeout scenario, built by the USGS and hundreds of scientists, modeled a magnitude 7.8 rupture on the southern San Andreas. The results? Roughly 1,800 dead, 50,000 injured, and over $200 billion in damage, with the deaths driven less by collapsing ground and more by fire, by hundreds of blazes ignited simultaneously from broken gas lines, in a city where water mains have failed and freeways are severed. The scenario planners found that the earthquake breaks the region's lifelines at exactly the moment they are needed most. Every major aqueduct bringing water into Los Angeles crosses the San Andreas. The fuel pipelines cross it. The freight rail lines and Interstate 15 cross it, most of them funneled through the very same Cajun Pass that the new research identifies as the earthquake gate. The single most vulnerable point in the fault system and the single most critical choke point of Southern California's infrastructure are the same 50-mile stretch of mountain corridor. So the fault is locked, the load is at a 1,000-year high, the gate is open, and the infrastructure sits on the hinge. Which brings us to the question that decides whether this video is journalism or fear bait. Does any of this mean the big one is about to happen? The honest scientific answer is no, and I want to be extremely precise about what that no means. There is no method anywhere on Earth that can predict the date, location, and magnitude of a specific future earthquake. Not this study, not any study. What this research measures is stress, not schedule. A fault at record stress is like a bow drawn further than it has ever been drawn. The physics guarantees that the release, when it comes, will be large. The physics says absolutely nothing about whether the release comes this afternoon or in the year 2070. Both are fully consistent with the data, and any video, article, or social media post that turns this study into a countdown is lying to you. It is also worth clearing out the noise that always floods in around San Andreas stories. Small earthquakes in the region, and Southern California produces a steady trickle of magnitude 3 events every month near the Salton Sea. In the desert around Ridgecrest, along the San Jacinto zone, are overwhelmingly normal background seismicity, not countdown ticks. Earthquake weather is a myth. Hot, dry days do not trigger ruptures. Planetary alignments do not load faults. Radio facilities do not trigger earthquakes. Animals cannot forecast them reliably, and neither can anyone selling predictions online. The only forces that matter here are 2 tectonic plates, 5 centimeters a year, and 169 years of arithmetic. And there is one more piece of honest nuance the doom headlines skip. The official long-term forecasts for California, built from all of this science, put the 30-year probability of a magnitude 8 or larger, somewhere around 7% statewide, while the probability of a magnitude 6.7 or larger, a Northridge class event, is effectively certain, greater than 99%. Read those 2 numbers together and you get the truthful picture. The monster quake is possible, but not promised in your lifetime. A destructive quake is essentially guaranteed. Preparing for the second automatically prepares you for the first. But here is what the calm scientific framing must not become, and this is the part the new research was genuinely shouting about. It must not become permission to relax, because the study's real message was aimed at policymakers, and it was blunt. Plan for a joint rupture of both fault systems as a realistic possibility, not a Hollywood scenario. And right now, the region is not ready for it. Los Angeles has made real progress, and that deserves saying. California's building codes for new construction are among the best on Earth. The Shake Alert early warning system is live across the West Coast, detecting the fast-moving first waves of a rupture and pushing alerts to millions of phones seconds before the destructive shaking arrives. Enough time to drop under a desk for trains to break, for elevators to open at the nearest floor. Los Angeles has ordered the retrofit of thousands of soft-story apartment buildings, the ones with parking tucked under the living space that pancaked in Northridge in 1994. But the honest audit is sobering. Thousands of vulnerable buildings remain unretrofitted. Older concrete structures, some of the deadliest building types and strong shaking, still stand throughout the basin. The water system that crosses the fault in multiple places would take months to fully restore. And surveys keep finding that most households in Southern California still do not keep even 3 days of water and supplies at home. Japan lives on ground at least as violent as California's, and Japan has repeatedly turned magnitude 7-class earthquakes into events with casualty counts in the single digits. The gap between Tokyo's outcome and the shakeout scenario's 1,800 dead is not geology. The plates under Japan push just as hard. The gap is decades of decisions, and California is standing in the middle of that gap right now, with 1,000 years of stress on the meter. Before we get to what you can control, there are 2 more layers to this story that almost never make it into the headlines, and both of them change how you should picture this event. The first is what a great San Andreas earthquake physically is, because the word earthquake makes people imagine a violent jolt, a scary minute, and then cleanup. That is not what a magnitude 7.8 on a fault like this looks like. A rupture of that size is not a point on a map. It is a tear in the planet's crust that starts at one spot and then races along the fault at more than 2 miles per second, unzipping segment after segment for 200 miles or more. If the rupture begins near the Salton Sea and runs northwest, the tear itself takes well over a minute to travel the length of the fault, and every city along the way gets its strongest shaking at a different moment, like a wave moving up the state. The ground on either side of the fault does not just vibrate, it permanently moves. In 1857, fences and stream channels crossing the fault were offset by as much as 30 feet. 30 feet of sideways displacement in minutes. Anything that crosses the fault line, a freeway, a rail line, an aqueduct, a gas pipeline, does not merely shake. It is cut, because the 2 ends of it are suddenly in different places. That is why the lifeline problem we talked about is not a matter of engineering tweaks. You cannot build a rigid pipe that survives its 2 halves moving 30 feet apart. You can only build systems that fail gracefully and can be repaired fast, and that work is still unfinished. The duration matters just as much. A Northridge-sized event shakes hard for 10 to 20 seconds. A great San Andreas rupture is expected to deliver 1 to 3 minutes of strong ground motion in places, and shaking duration is a silent killer of buildings because structures that ride out the first 30 seconds accumulate damage with every additional cycle, weakening connection by connection until something lets go. Los Angeles has one more unwelcome amplifier, the basin itself. The city sits on a deep bowl of soft sediment, and when seismic waves enter that bowl from a San Andreas rupture to the north and east, they slow down, stack up, and reverberate, the way water sloshes in a bathtub. Modeling consistently shows the basin can trap and amplify the long, rolling waves that tall buildings and long bridges feel most, which is why a rupture 50 miles away is still very much a Los Angeles problem. And this is also where the early warning math becomes real. Shake alert cannot warn the town sitting on top of the epicenter. Physics does not allow it, but for a rupture starting near the Salton Sea, the system could give San Bernardino tens of seconds and central Los Angeles a minute or more before the strongest waves arrive, because the alert travels at the speed of light while the destructive waves travel at the speed of sound in rock. A minute of warning, received by 20 million people who know what to do with it, is one of the most powerful casualty-reducing tools ever built. A minute of warning received by people who have never rehearsed is just 60 seconds of confusion. The technology is deployed, the training is the missing half. The second layer is the fault that shares the gate because everyone has heard of the San Andreas, and almost nobody outside the field has heard of the San Jacinto, even though it is arguably Southern California's most active major fault. The San Jacinto branches away from the San Andreas at Cajun Pass and runs south through the heart of the Inland Empire, directly beneath and beside San Bernardino, Riverside, in a corridor of more than 4 million people before continuing toward the Mexican border. Historically, it has been the busier of the two, producing a string of magnitude 6 to 7 class earthquakes over the last century and a half, and paleoseismic work shows it is fully capable of larger events. This is the fault that the earthquake gate research says could rupture jointly with the San Andreas, and the reason that scenario is so much worse than the sum of its parts is geographic. A San Andreas-only rupture puts its strongest shaking along the mountains and desert edge of the megacity. A joint rupture drags the strongest shaking directly through the urban core of the Inland Empire on the San Jacinto's path, through older downtowns with exactly the vintage of concrete and masonry buildings that perform worst. Meanwhile, at the far southern end of the system, the fault dips its toe into the Salton Sea, and that is a spot worth knowing about because the lake sits directly on top of the fault's southernmost segment, the one with roughly 3 centuries of accumulated silence. Every few years, swarms of small earthquakes ripple under the Salton Sea near Bombay Beach and Nyland, and each time they do, seismologists quietly hold their breath, because those swarms occur close enough to the locked section that they temporarily raise the calculated odds of triggering it before the odds decay back to baseline within days. It has happened before. In 2016, the state activated its earthquake response protocols over exactly such a swarm, and the region is still producing small events near Nyland this summer. None of those swarms has pulled the trigger. Any one of them, in principle, could. That is the uncomfortable arithmetic of living beside a drawn bow. And if you want a preview of what even a modest failure looks like in this region, you do not need a model, you need a memory. January 17th, 1994, Northridge. Magnitude 6.7, a blind thrust fault nobody was watching. 20 seconds of violent shaking in the San Fernando Valley. 57 people died, more than 9,000 were injured, freeway overpasses pancaked onto the roads below, and the bill came to around $20 billion. At the time, the costliest disaster in American history. Now hold that event next to the arithmetic we covered earlier. Magnitude 7.8 releases roughly 45 times the energy of Northridge, sustained not for 20 seconds, but for minutes, across not one valley, but the entire southern half of the state. Northridge was Southern California's midterm exam, and the region passed it bruised. The San Andreas is the final, and the new research says the exam is fully written, sitting in the drawer, undated. So let us close with what you can actually control, because information without action is just anxiety. If you live anywhere in Southern California, or anywhere near this fault system, there's an afternoon of work that changes your odds completely. Store water, 1 gallon per person per day, aim for at least 3 days, and build toward 2 weeks. Keep food that needs no cooking, flashlights, batteries, and your medications where you can grab them. Learn where your gas shutoff valve is and keep the wrench nearby, because after a great earthquake, the fires are the second disaster. Bolt the bookcases, strap the water heater, move the heavy mirror off the wall above your bed. Download the Shake Alert enabled app for your state, and take the alert seriously when it fires. Those seconds are real. Agree on a family meeting point and an out-of-state contact, because local phone networks will fail. And practice the actual move, drop, cover, and hold on until it is automatic, because in strong shaking you will not have time to think, only to do what you rehearsed. None of this stops the earthquake. All of it changes what the earthquake means for your household. Here is the final thought. The San Andreas does not know that Los Angeles exists. It has been doing this, locking, loading, and releasing for millions of years, long before the first freeway crossed Cajon Pass, and it will continue, long after. The plates will not slow down because we are unprepared, and they will not hurry because we are afraid. What this year's research did is remove the last comfortable illusion, the idea that the fault might somehow be running behind schedule in a way that buys us time. The stress is at a 1,000-year high. The gate at Cajon Pass is open. The release is not a question of if, and it never was. The only question that has ever mattered is the one Japan answered decades ago and California is still answering today. When the lock finally breaks, will the ground be the only thing that was ready? We will keep tracking every development on this system, every new study, every notable swarm near the Salton Sea, every change the monitoring networks. Pick up, and when something genuinely changes, you will hear it here with the data, not the drama. Subscribe so you do not miss it, and leave that comment below. Have you ever felt a California earthquake, and did it change how prepared you are? Tell me your story, because these are not just geological events, they are human experiences, and that is how we stay motivated to take this seriously.